the Seamstress advertisement tacked to the general store wall in Trinity, Nevada, had been there for 3 weeks when Clara Sawyer finally saw it, her fingers trembling as she read the words that might save her from destitution in this harsh frontier town of 1878. She had arrived in Trinity 2 months earlier with her brother's family, expecting to help care for their children while building a new life out west. But cholera had swept through their modest homestead with merciless efficiency, taking her brother, his wife, and both little ones within a week. Clara had survived, though some days she wondered if that was truly a blessing when she woke alone in a borrowed room above the saloon, her meager savings dwindling with each passing day. At 22 years old, she found herself utterly alone in a town that had little use for single women who were not selling companionship of the wrong kind. The advertisement was simple and direct, written in a firm hand that suggested its author was not given to flowery language. Seamstress wanted, must be skilled with needle and thread. Room and board provided. Apply at the Jackson Ranch 5 miles north of town. Ask for Samuel Jackson. Clara had been sewing since she was 5 years old, her mother's patient instruction creating a skill that had always brought her quiet joy. She could mend anything, create beautiful garments from the plainest fabric, and her embroidery had once won a prize back in Ohio before the war changed everything. This job, this opportunity, felt like the first ray of sunlight breaking through months of gathering storm clouds. She borrowed a horse from the livery owner, promising to return it by nightfall, and rode north with the advertisement folded carefully in her pocket. The Nevada landscape stretched around her in shades of brown and green, sagebrush dotting the valley floor while mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels. The wind carried the scent of dust and wild grass, and despite everything she had lost, Clara felt something stir in her chest that might have been hope. The Jackson Ranch revealed itself gradually as she crested a low rise. It was not the largest spread she had seen in Nevada, but it was well maintained, with sturdy fences, a barn that looked recently painted, and a house that spoke of someone who took pride in their property. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, their brown and white forms moving slowly across the landscape. A vegetable garden stretched along one side of the house, surprisingly lush in this dry climate, suggesting someone tended it with care and precious water. Clara dismounted near the porch, her travel-worn dress doing little to boost her confidence. She smoothed the fabric as best she could, aware that first impressions mattered, especially when seeking employment. Before she could knock, the door opened, and she found herself facing a man who seemed carved from the very landscape surrounding them. Samuel Jackson stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that came from years of hard labor rather than any natural gift. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lines etched around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s, though the frontier had a way of aging people beyond their years. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of gray that reminded her of storm clouds gathering over the mountains. He wore simple ranch clothes, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing muscular forearms, and denim pants that had seen considerable wear. "Help you?" His voice was deep, cautious, the words of a man who did not waste breath on unnecessary conversation. "I am here about the seamstress position," Clara said, grateful her voice remained steady despite her nervousness. "My name is Clara Sawyer. I saw your advertisement in town." Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite name it. Relief, perhaps, mixed with uncertainty. He stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. "Come in. We can talk inside." The interior of the house was clean but bore the unmistakable mark of a man living alone. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, though well made. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows let in generous amounts of light. What struck Clara most was the sheer volume of fabric scattered throughout the main room. Bolts of cloth leaned against chairs, baskets overflowed with what appeared to be mending, and a dress form stood in one corner draped with partially completed garments. "My mother passed 6 months ago," Samuel said, following her gaze. His voice carried a weight that spoke of grief not yet fully processed. "She handled all the sewing for the ranch hands, did some work for folks in town too. I have been managing the ranch business, but this—" He gestured helplessly at the fabric. "I cannot keep up. The men need clothes that are not falling apart, and I have orders from townspeople that my mother promised to complete. I need someone who knows what they are doing." Clara moved to one of the baskets, gently lifting a work shirt that needed buttons replaced and a tear in the sleeve mended. The fabric was good quality, the kind that would last years with proper care. "Your mother did beautiful work," she said, noting the even stitches on an older mend. "She did," Samuel agreed, and Clara heard the ache in those two words. "I've tried to find someone for 3 weeks." "You are the first person to respond." That surprised her. "Truly," he shrugged, moving to stand near the window where he could look out over his land. "Most women in Trinity are already married or have family obligations, the few who might have been interested." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "They had expectations about the position that I could not meet." Clara understood immediately. They had hoped for a different kind of arrangement, one that ended with a ring and a claim to this ranch. She had seen it often enough, the way the frontier created desperate situations that made people calculating in their survival strategies. "I want to be clear about what I am offering," Samuel continued, turning to face her. "You would have your own room, meals provided, and wages of $20 a month. The work would be steady. I have 9 ranch hands who are constantly wearing through clothes, plus the town orders. In exchange, I expect quality work, reliability, and discretion. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You understand?" $20 a month was generous, more than she had hoped for. Room and board meant security, a roof over her head that did not depend on charity or the questionable hospitality of a saloon keeper who had been growing increasingly suggestive in his comments. But it was Samuel's final words that truly mattered. He was offering her safety, a position that would not compromise her reputation or require her to fend off unwanted advances. "I understand completely," Clara said, meeting his gray eyes directly. "I am skilled with a needle. I can mend, alter, and create new garments. I do quality work, and I can provide references if you need them." She paused, then added quietly, "I need this position, Mr. Jackson. I will not disappoint you." Something in her words seemed to reach him. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn but clean dress, the careful way she handled his mother's sewing, the honest desperation in her eyes that she could not quite hide. "When can you start?" he asked. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she almost swayed. "Immediately, if you wish. I would need to collect my belongings from town, but I could return this afternoon." Samuel nodded once, decisive. "I will ride in with you, help you bring your things back. If you are going to work here, we might as well get you settled today." They rode to Trinity together, and Clara found Samuel to be a man of few words but considerable thoughtfulness. He asked about her sewing experience, listened carefully to her answers, and did not pry into the personal tragedy that had brought her to Nevada. When they reached the saloon where she had been staying, he waited with the horses while she gathered her belongings, which fit into a single worn carpet bag, and a small trunk that held her sewing supplies. The saloon keeper looked disappointed to see her go, but brightened when Samuel paid him for her room through the end of the week, even though she was leaving early. "No need to cheat a man just because circumstances changed," Samuel said simply as they loaded her trunk onto his horse. That single action told Clara more about her new employer than 100 words could have. He was fair, honorable, and unbothered by the extra expense when principal was involved. The ride back to the ranch felt different, less like she was visiting and more like she was heading towards something that might become home. Samuel showed her to a bedroom on the ground floor, a simple room with a bed, dresser, washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It had clearly been his mother's sewing room at one point, as there was a large table perfect for cutting fabric and shelves that still held spools of thread and various supplies. "My mother's room was upstairs," Samuel explained, standing in the doorway. "I thought you would prefer your own space down here, more private, and you will have room to work without being disturbed." "It is perfect," Clara said honestly, setting her carpet bag on the bed. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson." "Samuel," he corrected. "If you are going to live here, no need for such formality." "Then you should call me Clara," he nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his weathered face. "Dinner is at 6. I cook basic food, nothing fancy, but it is filling. Tomorrow I will show you where everything is, introduce you to the ranch hands, and you can start sorting through what needs to be done." That first evening, Clara sat across from Samuel at a simple wooden table and ate beef stew that was indeed basic but hearty and well seasoned. He was not much for conversation during meals, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. After dinner, he excused himself to check on the animals, leaving her to explore her new surroundings. She found herself drawn to the baskets of mending, her fingers itching to bring order to the chaos. By lamplight, she sorted through the work, making mental notes of what needed to be done and in what order. There were shirts with torn seams, pants that needed patches, a dress that required the hem to be completely redone, and several items that appeared to be special orders in various stages of completion. Samuel found her there 2 hours later, surrounded by organized piles of fabric and mending. He stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You did not need to start tonight." "I wanted to see what I was working with," Clara replied, sitting back on her heels. "You have about 40 hours of mending here, plus another 60 hours or so in the special orders. If I work steadily, I can have the mending complete in 2 weeks and the orders done within a month and a half." He blinked, clearly not having expected such a thorough assessment. "My mother kept records of who ordered what and when they needed it. I will find them for you tomorrow." "That would be helpful," Clara said, rising and brushing dust from her skirt. "I should warn you, some of these orders may be overdue if they were placed before your mother passed." "I know," Samuel said quietly. "I have been putting people off, telling them it would be done when it was done. They have been patient, knowing the circumstances." Clara heard the guilt in his voice, the weight of obligations he could not fulfill on his own. "Then we will make it right," she said firmly. "Together." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something shift behind his gray eyes. It was too soon to call it trust, but perhaps it was the beginning of it, the first thread of connection between two people who had both known loss and were trying to build something from the wreckage. The days developed a rhythm that Clara found comforting in its predictability. She woke early, prepared breakfast alongside Samuel in a companionable quiet that suited them both, then settled into her sewing while he managed the ranch. The work was substantial but satisfying. Each completed mend, each finished garment, felt like a small victory, proof that she was earning her place here. The ranch hands were a mixed group, ranging from young cowboys barely 18 to grizzled men who had been working cattle since before Clara was born. Samuel introduced her simply as their new seamstress, and to her relief, he made it clear through his tone and manner that she was under his protection. The men were respectful, grateful to have someone who could repair their work clothes properly, and they quickly learned to leave their mending in a basket by the kitchen door rather than disturb her while she worked. One hand in particular, a weathered man named Tom who served as foreman, seemed especially relieved by her presence. "The boss tried to help," he confided one afternoon when he brought her a shirt with buttons missing, "but the man cannot sew to save his life. I had a shirt come back with the sleeves attached wrong. Backwards, I tell you. Had to wear it inside out for a week." Clara could not help but laugh at the image, and Tom grinned. "You are good for this place, miss. It has been too quiet since Mrs. Jackson passed. Nice to hear laughter again." She thought about those words later as she worked on a complicated dress order, her needle moving in steady rhythm. The ranch had been grieving, she realized, not just Samuel but all the people who worked here. His mother must have been the heart of this place, the warmth that balanced the hard work and harsher elements of ranch life. Clara did not fool herself into thinking she could replace such a person, but perhaps she could help bring a different kind of life back to these quiet rooms. Samuel remained somewhat distant in those first weeks, polite and considerate but carefully maintaining the boundaries he had established. He worked long hours, often coming in after dark smelling of cattle and honest sweat, eating whatever dinner Clara had kept warm for him before heading to bed. They spoke of practical matters, the ranch business, supply needs, updates on the sewing work, but little that was personal. Yet Clara began to notice small things. The way Samuel always made sure there was fresh water in her pitcher each morning. How he repaired a wobbly leg on her sewing table without being asked. The evening he came in with wildflowers and set them in a jar on the kitchen windowsill, mumbling something about the place needing color before retreating quickly outside again. A month into her employment, Clara finished the last of the overdue orders, a beautiful christening gown for a woman in town whose baby was already 3 months old. She had worked extra hours to complete it, adding delicate embroidery that the original order had not specified because the work deserved to be done right. When Samuel took the finished gown to town the next day, he returned with a strange expression on his face. "Mrs. Patterson cried," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional display. "She said it was more beautiful than she had imagined. She paid double what my mother had quoted and said to tell you that you are an artist." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected praise. "I only did what the work required." "No," Samuel said, moving closer to examine a shirt she was mending. "You did more than that. You care about the work, about making it right. That is rare." Their eyes met, and Clara felt something electric pass between them, a spark of recognition that went beyond employer and employee. Samuel seemed to feel it too because he stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "I should check on the horses." He left, and Clara sat very still, her heart beating faster than it should. She was developing feelings for Samuel Jackson, she realized, with a mixture of exhilaration and concern. He was good and kind and honorable, everything she had learned not to expect from men in this hard country. But he had been clear about their arrangement, and she could not afford to risk her position by hoping for something more. Summer deepened into the brutal heat of August, and Clara learned to work in the early morning and late evening to avoid the worst of the temperature. Samuel had rigged a shade cloth over part of the porch, creating a space where she could sit and sew with whatever breeze might stir. She often worked there in the afternoons, and Samuel developed a habit of joining her when his work brought him near the house. sitting in silence while he repaired tack or sharpened tools. They talked more during those shared afternoons, conversation coming easier in the drowsy heat. Samuel spoke of the ranch, how his father had started it 30 years ago and built it into something profitable through sheer determination and smart decisions about water rights. "He died when I was 19, Samuel said, working oil into a bridle. Left me the ranch and a lot of expectations. My mother stayed, helped me keep things running. She was the strongest person I have ever known." "You must miss her terribly," Clara said softly, her needle moving through fabric in steady pulls. "Every day," he admitted. "The house feels wrong without her, too quiet, too empty." He paused, then added, "Until you came, it is different now. Better." Clara's hands stilled, and she looked up to find Samuel watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am glad," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, then returned his attention to the bridle with deliberate focus. But the air had changed, charged with possibilities neither of them was quite ready to name. The following week, a rattlesnake spooked Samuel's horse while he was checking fence lines in the far pasture. The horse bucked. Samuel went down hard, and by the time Tom and another hand got him back to the house, his left arm was swelling and clearly broken. Clara heard the commotion and rushed outside to find Samuel being helped down from a horse, his face pale with pain. "We need to get the doctor," she said immediately, moving to his side. "Doctor is in Carson City for the week," Tom said grimly. "Closest help is Doc Henderson in Silver Springs, and that is a 3-hour ride." "Then someone needs to ride fast," Clara said firmly, helping support Samuel's weight. "And we need to get him inside and comfortable. That arm needs to be stabilized." Between them, they got Samuel into the house and onto his bed. Clara had helped her mother nurse neighbors through various injuries and illnesses, and while she was no doctor, she knew enough to be useful. She sent one hand racing for the doctor while she and Tom carefully cut away Samuel's shirt sleeve to examine the break. It was bad, the bone clearly displaced, and Samuel's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "This is going to hurt," she warned him, "but we need to stabilize it before the doctor arrives." "Do what you need to do," Samuel ground out, his gray eyes fixed on her face. With Tom's help, Clara fashioned a splint using boards from kindling wood and strips torn from an old sheet. Samuel did not cry out, but sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing came harsh and fast. When it was done, she gave him whiskey for the pain and sat beside his bed, bathing his face with cool water until the worst of the shock passed. "You should rest," she murmured, but Samuel caught her hand with his good one, his grip surprisingly strong. "Stay," he said, the single word carrying a weight of meaning. "Please." So Clara stayed, sitting in a chair beside his bed while afternoon faded into evening. Samuel drifted in and out of sleep, and whenever he woke, his eyes sought her first, seeming to need the reassurance of her presence. The doctor arrived near midnight, examined Samuel's arm, and nodded approval at Clara's work. "You probably saved him from a worse break," Doc Henderson said as he prepared to properly set the bone. "The splint kept it from moving around. You have done this before. Helped my mother with injured farmhands back in Ohio," Clara explained, holding the lamp steady while the doctor worked. Setting the bone was brutal, and Samuel finally did cry out, a harsh sound that tore at Clara's heart. But it was done, the arm properly aligned and casted, and the doctor left instructions for care and pain management that Clara committed to memory. For the next week, Clara found herself nursing Samuel through the worst of his recovery. He was a terrible patient, frustrated by his limitations and worried about the ranch work piling up while he was confined to the house. Clara managed him with a combination of firmness and understanding, enlisting Tom to handle the immediate ranch needs while she made sure Samuel rested and healed. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, read to him from the few books in the house when he grew restless, and sat with him in the evenings talking about anything and everything. In his weakened state, Samuel's carefully maintained walls crumbled, and Clara learned things about him she suspected few people knew. He told her about the loneliness of running a ranch alone, the weight of being responsible for so many people's livelihoods. He spoke of dreams he had once had of expanding the ranch, maybe raising horses alongside cattle, but how those dreams had faded as the daily work of survival took precedence. He confessed that he had been thinking of selling the ranch before his mother passed, feeling worn down by the relentless demands. But her death had somehow made him more determined to keep it going, to honor what his parents had built. "And then you came," Samuel said one evening, his pain-dulled eyes fixed on her face. "And the house did not feel like just a burden anymore. It felt like it might become a home again." Clara's breath caught. "Samuel, I know what I said when I hired you," he continued, his words slightly slurred from the laudanum the doctor had left for pain. "Business arrangement, nothing more, but I was lying to myself. Every day I watch you bring life back to this place, and I think about how empty it will be if you ever leave. I think about how wrong I was to believe I could keep my distance, and I think about how beautiful you look in the morning light when you do not know I am watching." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "You are injured and medicated. You should rest." "I am injured and medicated and finally brave enough to tell the truth," Samuel countered, reaching for her hand with his good one. "I have feelings for you, Clara, strong feelings. If that makes you uncomfortable, if you want to maintain the distance I was fool enough to insist on, I will understand. But I needed you to know." Clara looked down at their joined hands, her heart racing. She had spent weeks trying to suppress her growing feelings, convincing herself that Samuel saw her only as an employee, that hoping for more was foolish. But here he was, vulnerable and honest, offering her something she had not dared to dream of. "I have feelings for you too," she whispered. "I have tried not to, tried to remember my place, but being here, seeing who you truly are, how could I not?" Samuel smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger, lighter. "Then we are both fools who made this harder than it needed to be." She laughed softly, squeezing his hand. "Rest now. We can talk more when you are healed and thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly for the first time in months," he argued, but let his eyes drift closed. "But I will rest if you promise to still be here when I wake." "I promise," Clara said, and she sat beside his bed until his breathing deepened into real sleep, her heart full of a hope she had thought lost forever. Samuel's recovery progressed steadily over the following weeks, and as his strength returned, so did the need to navigate this new territory between them. He could not work as he had before, his broken arm limiting what he could do, which meant more time spent around the house and more opportunities for them to be together. They talked endlessly, learning each other's stories, dreams, and fears. Clara told him about growing up in Ohio, her close relationship with her brother, and the devastation of losing him and his family to cholera. Samuel shared memories of his mother, his complicated relationship with his stern father, and the overwhelming responsibility he had shouldered at 19 when inheritance came too soon. But they also laughed together, finding joy in small moments. Samuel taught Clara about ranch management, explaining the complexities of cattle prices and water rights and land management. Clara taught Samuel the basics of sewing, mostly to prove it was harder than it looked, and they both ended up in fits of laughter when his first attempt at a straight seam wobbled like a drunk snake. The ranch hands noticed the change, the way Samuel and Clara gravitated toward each other, the softness in their employer's eyes when he looked at the seamstress. Tom approached Clara one afternoon with a knowing smile. "The boss is happier than I have seen him in years. You are good for him." "He is good for me too," Clara admitted, no longer trying to hide what was becoming obvious to everyone. 6 weeks after his injury, the doctor returned to examine Samuel's arm and declared it healed enough to remove the cast. The bone had set well, though Samuel would need to build back strength gradually. That evening, with his arm finally free, Samuel found Clara on the porch where she sat sewing by lamplight. "Walk with me," he asked, and Clara set aside her work immediately. They walked together through the warm September evening, the sky above them a riot of stars that seemed close enough to touch. Samuel led her to a small rise behind the barn where the view opened up to show the entire valley. The ranch spread out below them like a promise. "I brought my mother here the day after my father died," Samuel said quietly. "She was crying, scared about the future, wondering how we would manage. I told her we would make it work, that I would take care of her and the ranch. I made her a promise that day that I would never let this place fail, that I would honor what my father built." He turned to face Clara, his gray eyes reflecting starlight. "I kept that promise, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that a ranch is not just land and cattle and hard work. It is supposed to be a home, a place where life happens, where people build futures together. I forgot that until you came into my life." Clara's heart thundered in her chest as Samuel took her hands in his. "I love you, Clara. I think I started falling in love with you the first day when you sorted through all that mending and promised to make it right. You have made everything right. You have brought light and laughter back into my life, made me remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond just surviving." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. "I love you too. You gave me safety when I had nothing, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me purpose, respect, and a place where I could heal from my grief. You showed me what a good man looks like, what it means to build something meaningful." Samuel cupped her face gently with his newly healed hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Then marry me. Not because it is practical or convenient, but because I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. Because when I think about this ranch, about home, you are in every single picture." "Yes," Clara breathed, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. "Yes, I will marry you." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a sweet exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and Clara melted into his embrace, finally allowing herself to fully feel everything she had been holding back. They stood there on that rise, kissing under the stars, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build a life together. They married 3 weeks later in Trinity's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she had painstakingly created during late nights when excitement made sleep impossible. Samuel wore a new suit that actually fit him properly, courtesy of his bride's skilled hands, and he looked at her during the ceremony like she was the only person in the world. Tom stood up as Samuel's best man, and Mrs. Patterson, whose christening gown had been the turning point in Clara's reputation, stood with Clara. The ceremony was short and heartfelt, the words of commitment carrying weight that both Samuel and Clara felt to their bones. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with such tenderness that half the women in the church teared up. The reception was held at the ranch, the hands having worked tirelessly to prepare the barn for a celebration. There was food and music and dancing, and Clara found herself spun around the makeshift dance floor by a succession of ranch hands and townspeople, all of whom seemed genuinely happy for the couple. But her favorite dance was the last one, held in Samuel's arms as the party wound down and the stars came out above them. "Happy," Samuel murmured against her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible," Clara replied honestly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Their wedding night was spent in Samuel's room, which had become their room, and they came together with a combination of nervousness and desire that made the experience both sweet and passionate. Samuel was gentle, careful, making sure Clara felt cherished and safe, and when they finally lay together in the aftermath, Clara thought she had never felt more complete. The months that followed were an adjustment as they learned to navigate married life. They had been living together already, which made some aspects easier, but being husband and wife changed things in subtle ways. Samuel was more demonstrative with his affection, stealing kisses while Clara worked, wrapping his arms around her waist when she stood at the stove, telling her he loved her multiple times a day as though making up for lost time. Clara blossomed under his attention, her natural warmth and humor emerging more fully now that she no longer had to guard her feelings. She continued her sewing work, but now it was a choice rather than a necessity, and she found satisfaction in being useful to the community while also managing the household alongside her husband. Winter came to Nevada with cold winds and occasional snow, and Clara discovered she loved the enforced closeness of the season. Samuel worked closer to the house during the worst weather, and they spent long evenings together by the fire, talking, reading, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. They made love frequently, finding joy in each other's bodies, learning what brought pleasure and connection. It was in late February that Clara realized she had not had her monthly bleeding in over 2 months. She had been feeling tired, her breasts tender, and certain smells that had never bothered her before now made her nauseous. She recognized the signs from helping her sister-in-law during her pregnancies, and the realization filled her with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She told Samuel that evening after dinner, her hands trembling slightly as she took his and placed them on her still flat stomach. "I am carrying your child," she said simply, watching his face carefully. Samuel's expression cycled through shock, wonder, and pure joy in the space of seconds. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Truly," Clara confirmed, laughing as Samuel swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down carefully as though she might break. "I am going to be a father," he said, wonder evident in every word. "We are going to have a baby. In late summer, I think," Clara said, happiness radiating from her. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased." Samuel cupped her face, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Clara, you have given me everything. A home, love, purpose, and now a child. I am more than pleased. I am overwhelmed with gratitude for every choice that led you to my door." He kissed her then, tender and reverent, and Clara felt the truth of his words in every touch. They had both known loss and loneliness, but they had found each other, and now they were creating new life together, building a future that honored the past while embracing hope. The pregnancy progressed well, though Clara suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into her 4th month. Samuel was attentive to the point of being overprotective, trying to keep her from any work he deemed too strenuous, which led to their first real argument as a married couple. "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara snapped one afternoon when Samuel tried to take a basket of mending from her hands. Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. I will not spend the next 5 months sitting idle. I just want you safe, Samuel protested. You and the baby both. Clara softened, seeing the genuine fear behind his actions. And we will be. But I need to feel useful, need to continue my work. I promise to rest when I am tired, to not lift anything too heavy, but please do not try to make me an invalid. They compromised, finding a balance between Clara's need for independence and Samuel's desire to care for her. She continued her sewing work, but cut back on taking orders from town, focusing instead on creating things for their coming child. She made tiny gowns and blankets, embroidering them with delicate patterns, while Samuel built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was perfectly smooth. Summer brought intense heat that made Clara's expanding belly feel even more cumbersome, but it also brought the anticipation of meeting their child soon. In early August, Clara woke to contractions that started mild but steadily intensified. Samuel sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in the county, and then paced the house like a caged animal while Clara labored. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Clara was exhausted, pain radiating through her body in waves, but she drew on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. Mrs. Chen was calm and encouraging, and through the window, Clara could occasionally hear Samuel's voice as Tom tried to distract him with ranch business. Finally, after hours of effort that left Clara drenched in sweat and shaking with fatigue, she felt the baby slide free in a rush of relief so intense she sobbed. A moment later, a wail filled the room, strong and indignant, and Mrs. Chen laughed. "You have a son," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. "A big, healthy boy with good lungs." Clara looked down at her son, seeing Samuel's dark hair and her own nose, tiny fists waving in the air as he announced his displeasure at this new world. Love crashed over her, so powerful it stole her remaining breath, and she held him close while Mrs. Chen finished her work. Samuel was allowed in shortly after, his face pale with worry that transformed into wonder when he saw Clara holding their son. He approached slowly, as though afraid he might disturb something sacred, and knelt beside the bed. "A boy," Clara said softly, turning so Samuel could see him better. "We have a son." Samuel reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's dark hair, his fingers so large against such a small head. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks unashamedly. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas Samuel Jackson, after Samuel's father and the foreman who had become a true friend to both of them. Tom was honored when they told him, his own eyes getting suspiciously bright as he accepted the responsibility of being the boy's godfather. The weeks following Thomas's birth were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Clara had known babies were work, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Thomas had a powerful set of lungs and opinions about when he should be fed, which seemed to be constantly. But Samuel was a devoted father, walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night, changing soiled cloths without complaint, and talking to Thomas as though he could understand every word. "He needs to know about the ranch," Samuel explained one evening when Clara found him showing their 6-week-old son the barn. "Got to start his education early." Clara just smiled, her heart full as she watched her husband and son together. This was what family looked like, what home felt like, and she thanked God every day for the advertisement that had brought her here. As Thomas grew, the ranch thrived alongside him. Clara had been right about Samuel having dreams of raising horses, and with her encouragement, He started small, acquiring a few quality mares and a good stallion. The venture proved successful, and within 2 years, Jackson Ranch was becoming known for producing solid working horses that were intelligent and even-tempered. Thomas was a bright child, quick to smile and curious about everything. He toddled after his father whenever possible, and Samuel was endlessly patient, teaching him about animals and land and responsibility. But Thomas also loved sitting with his mother while she sewed, content to play with scraps of fabric while she worked, already showing signs of his mother's creativity as he arranged the pieces into patterns. When Thomas was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or maybe because she was not simultaneously grieving and starting a new life. Samuel was thrilled, hoping for a daughter this time, though he insisted he would be equally happy with another son. Their daughter arrived in early spring, born quickly in the early morning hours as though eager to join the world. She had Clara's coloring, with lighter brown hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same shade of hazel as her mother's. They named her Rose Catherine, after Samuel's mother Catherine, and because she was born when the wild roses were beginning to bloom across the valley. Rose was a different child than Thomas had been, more demanding and spirited, keeping both parents on their toes. She had a temper when things did not go her way but could also be incredibly sweet, and she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the first moment she looked up at him and smiled. The years passed in the way they do, when life is full and rich. Thomas started school in Trinity, riding in with Tom 3 days a week while Rose stayed home with Clara, helping with the sewing in ways that were more hindrance than help but delighted Clara nonetheless. Samuel expanded the horse breeding operation, and Jackson Ranch became prosperous enough that they could hire more hands and make improvements to the property. They added rooms to the house, creating more space for their growing family. Clara insisted on a proper sewing room, separate from her bedroom, where she could work on projects without little hands getting into her supplies. Samuel built her a beautiful space with large windows and custom shelving, presenting it to her on their 5th wedding anniversary with a pride that made her cry happy tears. On their 10th anniversary, Clara and Samuel stood together on the same rise where he had proposed, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Thomas was 11 now, already showing signs of the man he would become, responsible and kind like his father. Rose was 7, all energy and opinions, keeping everyone entertained with her dramatic declarations and fierce affection. "You ever think about that advertisement?" Samuel asked, his arm around Clara's waist, holding her close. "About how a simple piece of paper changed everything." "I think about it often," Clara admitted, leaning into his warmth. "I think about how lost I was, how alone, and how walking through your door was like stepping into the life I was always meant to have." "I hired you as a seamstress," Samuel said, his voice rich with emotion, "but you stitched yourself into every part of my life. You mended my broken heart, wove joy into these rooms, and helped me create something more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved more with each passing year. "We created it together. That is what makes it beautiful." They kissed as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other in the wilderness and built a love story worth living. Below them, the ranch sprawled across the valley, home to their family, their dreams, and their future. The house glowed with lamplight, and Clara could see Thomas and Rose through the window, arguing about something with the intensity only siblings could muster, and her heart swelled with gratitude for this life they had made. The years continued to unfold with the inevitable mixture of joy and challenges that defined any life well lived. When Thomas was 15, he announced his intention to become a veterinarian, having developed a deep love for animals that went beyond simple ranching. Samuel and Clara supported his dream, making arrangements for him to apprentice with the veterinarian in Carson City while continuing his academic studies. It meant their son would be gone for long stretches, coming home only on weekends and holidays, and Clara felt the ache of his absence like a physical pain. But she also felt pride watching him pursue his passion with the same determination his father showed in everything he undertook. Rose, at 11, had decided she wanted to be a seamstress like her mother, but also a rancher like her father, and possibly a teacher because she liked telling people what to do. She had no intention of limiting herself to one pursuit, and both Clara and Samuel encouraged her fierce independence, even as they helped her understand that choices would eventually need to be made. When Clara was 38, she discovered she was pregnant once more, a surprise that shocked them both given Rose's birth had been 8 years earlier. Samuel was concerned about the risks of pregnancy at Clara's age, but the doctor assured them that while there were additional considerations, Clara was healthy and strong. Their third child, a son they named Daniel, arrived safely in the winter of 1889, a robust baby who seemed determined to make up for being a surprise by being the easiest of their children. He was a calm, happy infant who slept well and rarely fussed, a blessing that Clara appreciated at 39 when her energy was not what it had been at 23. Thomas came home from his studies to meet his baby brother and was fascinated by the tiny human, treating him with the careful attention he usually reserved for newborn foals. Rose was less impressed initially, having enjoyed being the youngest, but she quickly fell in love with Daniel when he would smile at her and only her, showing a preference for his sister that won her over completely. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's careful management and willingness to adapt to changing markets, keeping them successful even as the frontier began to shift and change around them. The Wild West was becoming less wild, civilization creeping in with railroads and telegraph lines and laws that brought both order and constraint. Trinity grew from a rough frontier town into a more established community with a proper school, a courthouse, and social organizations that Clara sometimes participated in, though she never forgot her roots or the desperation that had brought her here all those years ago. She often hired young women who needed work, teaching them sewing skills and providing the kind of opportunity she had once desperately needed. When Thomas completed his veterinary training at 21, he returned to Trinity to open his own practice, serving the ranchers and townspeople with skill and compassion that made both his parents proud. He met a young woman named Elizabeth, a teacher who had moved to Nevada from Boston, and their courtship was sweet and earnest, reminding Clara and Samuel of their own early days. Thomas married Elizabeth in 1895 in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, and Clara cried as she watched her son pledge his life to this intelligent, kind woman who clearly adored him. Samuel stood beside her, his hair now more gray than brown, his weathered face lined with years of sun and work, but his eyes were bright with pride and joy. Rose, at 17, was beautiful and spirited, drawing attention from young men throughout the county. But she had high standards, having been raised by a father who treated her mother with unwavering respect and love, and she was in no hurry to settle down. She helped manage the ranch's books, having discovered a talent for numbers that Samuel gratefully employed, and she continued to sew with her mother, creating garments that were sold as far away as San Francisco. Daniel, at 6, was a happy child who loved the ranch and everything about it. He followed Samuel everywhere, learning about cattle and horses and land management with an enthusiasm that suggested he would be the one to eventually take over Jackson Ranch. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Clara with a trip to San Francisco, their first real journey together beyond the demands of ranch life. They left the children in Tom's capable care, Thomas and Elizabeth promising to check in regularly, and they took the train west to the city by the bay. Clara had never seen anything like San Francisco, the bustling streets, the grand buildings, the ocean stretching to the horizon in shades of blue she had only dreamed of. Samuel took her to fine restaurants, to the theater, shopping for things they did not need but enjoyed buying anyway. They stayed in a beautiful hotel with a view of the water, and they made love like newlyweds, the years falling away as they rediscovered each other away from the daily routines of home. "Thank you," Clara said one evening as they walked along the waterfront, her hand tucked into Samuel's arm. "For this trip, for 20 years of love and partnership, for being the man I always hoped existed but had stopped believing I would find." Samuel stopped walking, turning to face her fully. At 50, he was still handsome, his gray hair and lined face giving him a distinguished air that Clara found incredibly attractive. "You saved me," he said simply. "I was becoming hard, closed off, losing the ability to see beauty in anything beyond work and duty. You reminded me how to live, how to love, how to hope. These 20 years have been the greatest gift of my life." They kissed there on the San Francisco waterfront, two people who had weathered storms and celebrated joys, who had built a life of meaning and purpose together. Around them, the city bustled with strangers pursuing their own dreams, but in that moment, Clara and Samuel were the only two people in the world. They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to embrace whatever years remained to them. Samuel began teaching Daniel more seriously about ranch management, preparing him for eventual ownership while making sure his son understood the responsibility that came with the land. Rose continued to thrive in her various pursuits, and when she was 19, she announced she wanted to attend the new state university, seeking education that would prepare her for whatever future she chose. Samuel and Clara supported her decision, proud of her ambition and intelligence. They helped her prepare for the move to Reno, where the university was located, and when they saw her off on the train, Clara cried while Samuel maintained a stoic exterior that fooled no one. Their daughter was stepping into a world of expanded possibilities, and while they would miss her terribly, they knew it was right. Thomas and Elizabeth had their first child when Clara was 44, a granddaughter they named Clara after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake, Clara felt the circle of life in a profound way, seeing her son as a father, watching him cradle his daughter with the same tender care Samuel had shown their children. The new century arrived with celebrations and speculation about what the future would bring. Clara was 46, Samuel 55, and they had lived through tremendous changes in the West. But Jackson Ranch remained, a constant in a changing world, a testament to hard work, smart management, and the love of two people who had built something lasting. Daniel graduated from the Trinity School at 16 and chose to work the ranch full-time rather than pursue additional education. He had a natural gift for the work, an intuitive understanding of animals and land that reminded Clara of Samuel in his prime. Father and son worked side by side, and Clara loved watching them together, seeing the respect and affection that flowed between them. Rose graduated from university with honors at 23, having studied both business and literature, creating her own unique educational path. She returned to Trinity with ideas about modernizing the ranch's business practices and plans to write about life in the West. She also returned with a young man named James, who had courted her persistently for 2 years, finally winning her heart through sheer devotion and a shared love of books. Samuel was skeptical at first. No father ever thinks any man is good enough for his daughter. But James proved himself by genuinely respecting Rose's independence and supporting her ambitions. When he asked Samuel for permission to marry Rose, he made it clear he had no intention of changing her or limiting her, that he loved her exactly as she was, fierce, intelligence, and all. Samuel gave his blessing, and the wedding was held at the ranch in the summer of 1902. Thomas and Elizabeth had 2 more children, giving Clara and Samuel a total of 3 grandchildren who filled the ranch with noise and laughter during visits. Samuel built a larger table for the dining room, needing space for their expanding family, and Sunday dinners became a treasured tradition, with multiple generations gathered to share food and stories. Clara's hair turned silver in her 50s, and she wore it proudly, having earned every strand through years of living fully. She still sewed, her hands as skilled as ever despite some arthritis that made long sessions more difficult. She had trained several young women over the years, creating a legacy of craftsmanship that continued in Trinity long after the need for a ranch seamstress had evolved into something different. Samuel slowed down as he entered his 60s, his body showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. He turned over more of the daily ranch management to Daniel, who had grown into a capable 20-year-old fully ready for the responsibility. But Samuel still rose early, still checked on the horses and cattle, still found satisfaction in the work that had defined his life. On their 30th anniversary, Clara and Samuel renewed their vows in the small church where they had married, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family over the decades. It was a simple ceremony, but deeply moving as they reaffirmed promises that had only grown stronger with time. "I hired you as a seamstress 33 years ago," Samuel said during the reception, standing to make a toast. "I thought I needed someone to mend clothes and complete my mother's orders. But what I really needed was someone to mend my heart, to complete my life, to show me that a ranch is just land and buildings without love to make it home. Clara, you have been my partner, my love, my greatest blessing. Here is to 30 more years." Clara's eyes filled with happy tears as she raised her glass. "To 30 more years, my love, though I suspect we will need them just to keep up with all these grandchildren." Laughter filled the room, and as Clara looked around at the faces of people she loved, at the life she and Samuel had built together, she felt a peace and contentment that went bone deep. She had arrived in Trinity with nothing but grief and a carpetbag, desperate for any opportunity to survive. She had found not just survival but a love story that had exceeded her wildest dreams, a family that brought joy beyond measure, and a purpose that made every day meaningful. The years continued their relentless march, bringing the inevitable losses that came with age. Tom passed away at 73, having worked at Jackson Ranch until the very end, faithful to the family he had served and loved. His funeral was attended by half the county, a testament to the impact one good man could have on a community. Samuel struggled with Tom's death, having lost a friend who had been constant through every stage of his adult life. But he had Clara beside him, and their children, and the ongoing work of the ranch that demanded attention regardless of grief. They mourned, they remembered, and they continued as people must. Clara's health remained good into her 60s, though she moved a bit slower and napped more often. She still sewed, but now primarily for her grandchildren, creating clothes and quilts that would become family heirlooms. She wrote down recipes and family stories, wanting to preserve the history of their life together for future generations. Samuel, at 70, finally agreed to step back from active ranch management, turning over full control to Daniel, who had proven himself more than capable. It was difficult for Samuel to let go, but Clara helped him see it as a gift to their son, allowing Daniel to make the ranch his own while Samuel was still alive to offer guidance when asked. In retirement, Samuel and Clara traveled more, visiting Thomas and his family, spending time with Rose and James and their children, enjoying the slower pace that came with age. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for over 40 years. "You have regrets?" Clara asked one evening, the question coming from a place of curiosity rather than concern. Samuel considered carefully, as was his way. "I regret the years I spent alone, closed off before you came. I regret not telling you I loved you sooner, those wasted weeks when we were both pretending we did not feel what we felt. But beyond that, no. This life, our life together, has been everything I could have hoped for and more." Clara squeezed his hand, weathered skin against weathered skin, two people who had aged together and loved it all. "No regrets here either, just gratitude for every moment, every challenge, every joy. You gave me a home when I had none, love when I had lost hope, and a family that has been my greatest treasure." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky transformed through shades of orange and pink and purple, the daily miracle of sunset that they had witnessed together thousands of times and never tired of. The ranch was quiet, the work done for the day, and inside the house, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. Samuel died peacefully in his sleep at 74, his hand holding Clara's as it had for over 40 years of marriage. She woke to find him gone, his weathered face peaceful, and though her heart shattered with the loss, she also felt gratitude that he had been spared suffering, that his last moments had been spent beside the woman he loved. The funeral was massive, people coming from across Nevada to pay respects to a man who had been fair in his dealings, generous with his help, and devoted to his family. Clara stood flanked by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace while feeling the enormous weight of his absence. In the weeks that followed, Clara learned to navigate life without Samuel's physical presence, though she felt him everywhere in the ranch they had built together. She stayed in the house, refusing suggestions from well-meaning children that she might be more comfortable elsewhere. This was her home, filled with memories of their life together, and she would remain as long as she was able. She lived 5 more years, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the satisfaction of seeing the ranch continue to thrive under Daniel's management, with the knowledge that the love she and Samuel had shared continued to ripple outward through generations. She sewed when her hands allowed, told stories about the old days when Trinity was truly wild, and counted her blessings daily. Clara passed away at 79, surrounded by family in the house where she had spent the best years of her life. Her last words were about Samuel, telling her children she could feel him waiting for her, ready to take her hand again. She died with a smile on her face, and those who loved her knew she had lived a life of meaning, purpose, and profound love. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations as Samuel and Clara had hoped. The original house was preserved carefully, becoming a touchstone for descendants who wanted to understand their roots. The story of the lonely cowboy who hired a seamstress and found his soulmate became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that love could bloom in the most unexpected places and circumstances. In the sewing room that Samuel had built for Clara, Her descendants found boxes of garments she had created over the years, each piece showing her skill and artistry. They found letters between Samuel and Clara from the rare times they were apart, words of love and longing that made their devotion undeniable. They found the original advertisement that had brought Clara to the ranch, carefully preserved in a frame, the words faded but still legible. Seamstress wanted. Must be skilled with needle and thread. Room and board provided. Apply at the Jackson Ranch. Those simple words had changed two lives completely, bringing together two people who had needed each other desperately without knowing it. A lonely cowboy who had forgotten how to dream and a grieving woman who had lost everything had found each other and built something that lasted generations. They had stitched their futures together with threads of love, respect, patience, and unwavering commitment, creating a tapestry of family and legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The story of Samuel and Clara Jackson became a testament to the power of taking chances, of being open to unexpected opportunities, of choosing love even when it seemed risky. They had both known loss and loneliness, but they had not let those experiences harden them beyond healing. Instead, they had chosen hope, chosen each other, and in doing so had created a love story worthy of remembering. Their great-grandchildren would stand on that same rise where Samuel had proposed, looking out over the ranch that still bore the family name, and they would understand that some things were worth preserving. Not just land or buildings, but the values of hard work, integrity, and love that had built the foundation of everything that came after. The Wild West had been tamed by time, Trinity evolving into a modern town with paved streets and electricity, and all the conveniences of the 20th century. But the essence of what Samuel and Clara had built remained, a reminder that true wealth was not measured in acres or cattle or profits, but in the quality of love shared, the strength of family bonds, and the legacy of goodness left behind. Two graves stood side by side in the Trinity Cemetery, simple headstones marking the final resting place of Samuel Joseph Jackson and Clara Sawyer Jackson. Visitors often left wildflowers, the same roses that bloomed across the valley each spring, honoring a love that had started with a simple job advertisement and grown into something extraordinary. Their story was complete, every thread woven into place, every promise kept, every dream fulfilled beyond what either could have imagined that day when a desperate woman responded to a lonely cowboy's need for a seamstress. They had stitched their futures together, and the pattern they created was beautiful enough to last forever.